Well, now I want to turn to Dennis Brennan, who is going to continue his build along of his coffee factory. Dennis, welcome.
Hey, thank you, Jim. And hi, guys. Well, why don't we get right to it and I'll recap what we did last week. So let's see here. All right. So just to recap, this is the Sanky Wanky Coffee Company. It was a kit that was originally a model by Frank Ellison, probably one of the considered one of the fathers of model railroading, along with John Allen and a bunch of other people. And the beauty that I've discovered about reproducing his kit, his models as kits, is that they're perfectly proportioned. And so this is the building. And last week we started and we talked about building the foundation. And the foundation is basswood. And it was glued together. I use super glue. I use liquid super glue, or I use gel super glue rather than wood glue. Why? Because I want it to be fast. I don't want to wait for wood glue to dry. So I like a super glue. Some people don't like them, but used judiciously, they work perfectly. And if you realize that there are different types of super glue, there's a liquid and there's a couple different kind of gels. There's like a medium and a thick, and they each have their purpose and a place to use them, which I talk about when the time is right. So we got through the foundation, making sure that everything is oriented correctly. And once you did that, then spray painted it with white primer. And then because it's a jointed, like a zipper joint, I use spackling to fill in any gaps, sand it a little bit, and then respray it with white, and then ultimately cover it with Rust-Oleum Desert Bisque. It's a multicolored textured spray paint, and that spray paint really simulates concrete quite nicely. And it's a very fine texture. And like I said last week, it's not the texture that I really like. It's the fact that it uses all these little different colors that make the concrete pop, and it looks like concrete. That makes it pop and look like concrete. All right, so with that said, we're going to start on the actual building sides. There's a lot of prep work that one has to do before you put a building together. And I don't care what kind of kit you're using, what kind of kit it is. There's always prep work to do. And one of the first things you should do, which I haven't already said probably, is read the instructions. Read them all the way through. And then read them again. And if there isn't anything, if there's something that you don't understand, don't worry about it. Just read it again. Eventually it will just, it will gel. I try to make my instructions so that they're perfectly clear. I build these models. I usually build 3 of them before I'm happy because I make some changes. But in that process, I discover the do's and the don'ts. And that's what I put in my instructions. So please follow the instructions. Even if you're a typical guy and you don't need any instructions, that doesn't work. There's a sequence that should be followed in any kit build. And if you're not a veteran modeler, you may put the cart before, you may not put the cart before the horse, you might screw it up. So at any rate, this building features a long chimney on each side. And that chimney has to be built. And we put that together before we do anything else, really. before you can put the building together, you want to put the chimney together. And the chimney on each side consists of 3 parts. There's a middle piece and there's 2 side pieces, and you can see that they go right here into these little holes. And you want to put this together before you do any painting, for a couple of reasons. One, you're going to get a much better fit. If you paint this ahead of time and then try to stick it in these holes, the tolerance is pretty tight. And so it would be really hard to get in there. So you don't want to do that. The other thing is, you probably don't want to glue. It's better to glue wood to wood rather than paint to glue. So at any rate, there's a top and a bottom for the shorter piece. The other side has a longer piece. This side has a shorter chimney. The shorter chimney has a top and a bottom on the middle piece. The bottom is perfectly straight across. The top has, an indent here. And it's important to get that straight. If you reverse it, you're going to run into problems. Because what you want to end up with is a nice, straight, flat piece up here with just these four protrusions, these 4 little blocks sticking out, because that's what the chimney cap will go on when we get to that later. If you put this together wrong, you won't have that. So just make sure you get that right. And then the other thing to think about is a lot of kits, especially brick building kits, the walls are not thick. A real brick building has thick walls, at least the old brick buildings that we're modeling. Brick walls were made up of several layers of brick. Today, it's a brick facade against plywood, against 2x4 framing. But in years past, they were actually solid brick buildings. 3-4 courses of brick thick sometimes. And in this case, because the chimney is wide, has a width to it, we also have to make the wall match. And so what we do is we put little spacers in between so that the wall and the chimney fit together. So there's actually a space underneath here. These spacers keep this wall pushed up against the chimney sides. Okay, and that also goes for these pieces here, these longer pieces. They go along the length of the building on the inside facing the roof. And again, there's a thickness on them. So we add spacers in between to get the right thickness so the walls look uniformly thick. Okay, now these are the walls for the building. It's actually not a difficult kit to put together. You just need to think about exactly the steps involved. So we paint, before you put any walls together, you need to paint them. And before you put the windows in, you need to paint the walls. The windows, we'll work on those next, but everything needs to be done on the walls prior to putting in the windows. And that's because once the windows are in, if you want to do any more, if you want to do some matte spray to cover up your weathering, now you're going to spray the windows. You don't want to do that. So what I did is I first painted the walls again with Rust-Oleum 2x Ultra Cover flat white primer. That's what I use. I'm sure any white primer would do. But the key here when you're doing a laser cut wooden kit is there's going to be a burn where these pieces of wood are cut. It's burned on the side, which looks almost black. It's not black, but it's pretty dark. And if you don't spray all of this, if you don't prime it, that's going to show up, that burn mark. It'll show up through the paint. So what you want to do is you want to prime this, and you want to prime those edges as well. And several light coats of priming rather than one heavy coat. And the best way to spray paint, make sure you shake the can for 3 minutes before you start. Really critical. That's what it says on the cans. Don't not shake it, or don't shake it for a shorter amount of time, because you're going to end up with a clogged can. And all cans don't spray alike. So I first suggest that you do a little spritz on a scrap piece of paper or cardboard or something, so you get a feel for the spray pattern. And keep the can about 12 inches away, and start off your piece, and then start the spray off this piece, and then keep your hand parallel to the piece, and spray across it in one pass, and stop the spray, then do it again. But don't just go back and forth, because you're going to wreck it. So several light coats like that, better than one heavy coat. And for the color that I used on this one was Rust-Oleum 2x Ultra Cover Flat Red Primer. And the name is actually a misnomer. It's actually a reddish brown color. And that's a sort of brown that tends to red, which is the color that I was after. You're free to use any color you like. But I try to give my brick buildings a slightly different look from one another. And so I vary the colors from building to building. And then the lintels and the sills, the lintels we call them brick soldiers. They're the ones that go over the top of the windows, and the sills obviously go underneath. Those are separately applied peel and stick pieces, and those I paint prior to putting them on here. But before I put those on, we'll just jump ahead here, because the windows are going to be a separate thing that we'll talk about later. These are the soldiers right here, and the sills go here. All right, and they're separately applied. Now, what I did with these, I just sprayed. These come on a laser board. It's a dark colored, very thin material, and it's basically brown, and I just sprayed the primer right over that, or sprayed the color right over that rather than prime them, and it just gives it a little accent. You can see the difference. Now, the other thing that I did here too is I added some mortar. Okay, and now to do the mortar, what I did was I took a damp rag and I wiped over the red painted surface. I wiped over it. I didn't soak it. I just wiped it over so it was damp. And then I took regular spackle and a wet finger, and I dipped it in the spackle and I spread it along the wall. And I did it as many times as I needed to get the spackle into the grooves. That's what we're after, getting the spackle into those grooves. And then I wiped it off. I wiped the surface off with a damp rag. And you're still going to have a little bit of a haze on there. That's okay. Don't worry about it. A little bit of haze doesn't hurt anything. You can see over here, there's a little, But what I do is after wiping it off, you let that dry. And before you do anything else, spray it with, I use Krylon matte spray. Very light spray, just spray it, and that will fix the mortar into the grooves. And then I used a couple colored chalks to weather it. I used a black and a brown. These are pastels, alpha color. I sell them at Brennan's Model Railroading. You can get them at probably any art supply store. I like these chalks because if you don't like what you do, you can just wipe it off. And that's the other reason you want to spray your mortar. Because if you don't spray the water and then you put the chalk on there and you try to wipe off the chalk or you try to blend it, you're gonna mess up the mortar. You don't want to do that. So spray the matte spray over the mortar, let it dry. Once it dries, then you can go over it with the chalk. And you'll notice I use the chalk along the top edge of the building and also underneath the windows. This is a very common, if you go and look at brick buildings, especially older brick buildings, you will see weathering very similar. Now, not always, not every building is going to look like that, but a lot of times you'll see it. So I just took, I took a Q-tip. Now what you can see is this Q-tip here. This tip I got at a drugstore. It's in the makeup department. Your wife will know all about that. It's pointy on one end and it's got a flat surface on the other. These are perfect for doing weathering with chalk. You just like the tip. I could take that tip and wipe it along, and then just you can put it exactly where you want. A little streak if you want. The flat end, if you wipe that along the chalk and get it on there, it's great for smearing right along and giving yourself like a line. So I think I used a flat part along here, and then I used the tip to do a little bit more of these. And you can go as far as you want with weathering. I tend to vary it on buildings, and I tend not to over weather. I don't think weathering should be the first thing that somebody notices. If they go, "Oh, wow, what great weather!" That it should all be done with subtlety. Now, there are some buildings that you can really go nuts on, and other buildings just do a little bit on. Why? Because then they don't all look alike. Then each building will have a little bit more character or different character. So just keep that in mind. Again, there's really no right or wrong way to do any of this stuff. I will vary my technique as I go along, but this is what works for me. You can also go over it with India ink alcohol mixture, spritzing it on, or just taking a brush and doing a brush load across the top and let it run down. I didn't do that on this. If I wanted to make it look more weathered, I probably would, because it's going to give you a different look. So I think that's about, and then once you do that, so you can see where I streaked it here and here. Once you do that, then you can add these sills. And then, so I think that's probably about as far as I want to go today. Do I have any time left, Jim?
You really don't, Dennis. You've done a great job.
All right.
Now, are there any questions about what Dennis has covered? You're doing a great job, Dennis.
All right. Well, thank you, guys.
Hey, Dennis, just one question.
Yes.
Some modelers, especially on O-scale, kind of advocate painting some of the bricks with kind of varying shades individually to get more variance. I noticed you didn't, I don't think you did that. Do you think that's not necessary? Or is it more the kind of building you're modeling or?
Um, Actually, I have done it on other buildings. I don't do it on all buildings because uh, it, it's a different look.
Okay.
Um, uh, One of the things that I've done, I've got another building I'm working on right now, and what I did is I did all this basic stuff that I just talked about, and then I took some, your regular craft paints, and I used a foam brush, one of those little foam brushes, and I just took the craft paint, spread it around on a glass plate with the foam brush, and then wiped a bunch of it off, and then just dabbed various places on the brick. And I did that with like 3 different colors, and I dabbed here and there and here and there until I got it a modeled look. And then I went over everything. I sprayed it and went over everything with India ink alcohol mixture. So it's a valid approach. It just depends on what you want and how you want your building to look. Does that answer it?
Yes. Yes. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Dennis. See you next week.
Hey, all right. Thank you, Jim, and thank you guys for tuning in. If anybody has any questions, just call me or email me.